What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, today is the day of the free-to-play challenge where we're actually going to dive in and we are going to create our first competitive deck of this challenge. It's definitely something I didn't think that would happen so quickly, only being on the 13th day overall of our challenge where we start off with a free-to-play deck and tried to grind out enough currency and resources to craft a competitive deck that we can use in standard viable and that we can dive into standard games and actually stand a fair chance. Now, in today's video, just because I'm not going to immediately dive into what deck I'm going to create, I'm going to kind of talk about a couple decks that I was thinking about while I was doing this process. And these decks widely range from a lot of different archetypes and varieties of what they're trying to do when it comes to playing, in the current standard and meta as a whole. A lot of these decks are fairly successful. They have proven track records. They're all above 50% win rate overall in the amount of games that they have played in the standard ladder for the most part, which is definitely a good place to start out. I do think that's like a core fundamental value. Getting that first one good deck is definitely always something I feel like you probably should strive for before you start doing your own thing and trying to maybe make your own deck up. Just because you don't want to make up your own deck, it doesn't really work out, and then you've wasted all that material and resources, and then you have to regrind it all to really craft a new deck. So in today's video, we're going to be diving into that. We're going to talk about what we're crafting and kind of talk about through the other decks that I was considering during this challenge. But first and foremost, before I dive in, I'm actually just going to re-roll our daily quest. Just kind of see what we get, if it's something that we can do. So we do have, 500 gold for blue and black spells, which will definitely be kind of interesting, but we'll kind of see how it plays out once we kind of talk about what deck we are going to craft. So here we dive into our deck page. I went ahead and I actually imported, 6 or so decks that I was considering here. And like I said, these are all interesting archetypes. They're definitely all viable decks and what each of them are trying to do. There's a couple aggro decks here. There's a couple decks that revolve around mechanics, and then there's other decks that are just kind of like they kind of stand their own and they kind of stood the test of time for the most part, with one of them being the first deck that I'm kind of partially blocking. But with that being said, I want to dive into the Dimir Ninjas deck that I was considering here. It was the one thing that why I was considering this is for the fact that I really didn't get to play a lot of Kamigawa. That's when I kind of took a break from creating content for the channel, and I really didn't, and this was right around the time that this set released. It's definitely an interesting concept, but from playing like ninjutsu in the jump in event, it's definitely I kind of better understand what the deck is all about. It is a tempo deck, which is a very active deck. We want to initially get in by getting creatures that are unblockable or not blocked by playing cards like Notebook Disruptor, Merfolk Wind Robber, possibly Thousand Face Shadow. These are very, very cheap cards. They all have flying, and they can all be played on turn 1. And the goal here is we want to swing in once they're able to attack, and then kind of cheat out a creature for a cheaper cost by playing its ninjutsu ability. Things like Silver Fur Master, Nizumi Prowler, Dukachi Silencer. We have a whole bunch of cards that are just overall, they have value when they're not blocked. Like, so when they deal damage to a player, they're going to trigger some sort of effect or ability, and then we're going to get some benefit out of it. And definitely, it's definitely a fun deck. Though I'm not sure if 100% like currently in the meta, if it's technically viable for what it's trying to do. We can craft the whole deck here, as this is a best of 1 deck. There is no sideboard currently for it, but we can definitely craft the whole deck, though it would take a lot of our currency. I don't know if it shows it here, but I know on the main deck screen, if we go back real quick, it does show that it will require us to use 1 common wild card, 7 uncommons, I believe almost all but 1 of our rare wild cards and 2 of our mythic wild cards, which would deplete us pretty drastically, but it's not really anything that's super groundbreaking. It's just that rare wild card is really the big thing. And like I said, this is maybe a deck I want to strive for, maybe to do a second deck. If I can maybe grind enough currency to do a second deck here, this could definitely be a viable option, as I do think Dimir Ninjas could be the deck that, kind of like makes its way back up to the top of the meta, just because ninjutsu is definitely an overall strong ability. It's just there's a lot of stuff currently in the meta list that kind of are better than it overall. But definitely a deck that I did consider, and it's like a tempo reactive deck, which is definitely kind of cool if that's your type of thing. Now, the next deck that we have up here on the list is a Rakdos Sacrifice deck. This is definitely another fun deck. It's a deck that's definitely very fun, but it is kind of tedious on how long it takes to really play the deck to really make it get working, because it is a lot of like ping your opponent for 1 point of damage, drain them for 1 point of damage, you gain a life, make them discard some cards, maybe take some damage from playing things like Obnixilis, things like that. But yet again, it's another viable deck. It loses a little bit when rotation happens, but it doesn't lose a whole ton. I really think the big things that it really loses is just like the Deadly Dispute. It loses Blood Chief's Thirst. Outside of that, the land base is maybe the only other thing that really gets a shake up, but for the most part, this deck is still somewhat viable. Like I said, the reason why I didn't really go with this one as much as it is probably a little bit higher up in the meta as a whole is just because the games would take a lot longer. And if I were to take this deck and try to use it for like my daily wins, it's going to take me a lot longer to pilot this deck to then get my 15 daily wins. Because I do think this is probably the slowest deck out of all of them. I think it takes roughly probably about 7 to 8 minutes probably to play a singular game of this. And if you times that by 15, and that's if you win all 15 games in a row, it's going to definitely take some time to really get those wins out, even at a decent win rate. But overall, it's still a fun deck. It's definitely another deck that I could consider down the road. It does have a lot of good cards that are definitely useful in other situations, like Fable Dimir Breaker, Meat Hook Massacre. Voltage Surge is definitely another viable 1 mana removal spell. And it's a lot of good cards that won't rotate out, but there are a decent chunk of cards that will, like things like Blightstep Pathways, the Creature Lands, and then the Bloodchief's Thirst and the Deadly Disputes are just to name a few. But definitely still a viable option if you do kind of like those drain decks that kind of like they kind of set up loops to kind of drain your opponent out for points of damage here and there, which is definitely not that bad of a deck. Now, the next deck up on the list is definitely a deck list I played before, and this is Mono Blue Delver. It's another reactive style deck. It's definitely a little bit of a mixture of aggro and control, and also like in that tempo range, as we want to get our 1-drops out fairly early, but then after that, we want to kind of leave our mana open that we can react to whatever our opponent is doing, whether it's playing spells that counter spells that they're doing, bouncing things back to their hand after they spent maybe their mana, or just slowly kind of like draining them a little bit here and there. And this is definitely one of those decks. Is definitely pretty viable. It does lose a little bit when rotation happens in the fall. One of the great creatures of the deck is Ascendant Spirit, as being a 1 mana 1/1, and we can use Snow mana to pump it up. 2 mana to make it a 2/3, 3 mana to make it a 4/4 with flying, and then 4 mana to make it to give it 2+1/+1 counters, and then whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, we get to draw a card. It's definitely another reactive deck, and this is kind of like that balance of how to know when you need to be aggro and when you need to be control. And this is definitely one of those decks that it definitely kind of draws on that fine line of a little bit of both. But it's definitely another viable deck, and I actually, like I said, I played this one. It's definitely a good deck. But yet again, I'm unsure of how well it's still going to be positioned in the future. I mean, there's definitely cards that we could add into the deck to kind of, swap out when rotation happens. Like, does a Ledger Shredder make sense to add in instead of Ascendant Spirit's a possibility? I believe we can also use Make It Disappear, though we don't get a land out of it. So it's definitely kind of one of those things that it's a wait and see to really see how viable it is. But yet again, it's another deck I was actually really strongly considering just because I have practice with the deck prior. But yet again, it's another deck that can win fairly quickly. I think it's roughly around 5 minutes or so for a game. So definitely a good deck. It's definitely a deck that if you like a little bit of control but also want to be a little bit aggressive, it's that fine balance of that deck. Now, the next deck up on the list is another fairly budget-friendly deck list that it doesn't require a bunch of rares. Actually, I think the most that we have to put in is maybe like 8 or so. And that's for 4 Pathways, 4 Kamis, and also 4 of the Weaver of Harmony. But the rest of the deck is actually fairly on the budget side, to be probably the most budget-friendly version of the deck. And it's definitely a good deck, though it does, it's one of those things. It's like do you want to play enchantments? This is like a very aggro, very intensive, like you have to kind of put all your cards into one basket. You kind of play a couple enchantments, you kind of try to pump your creature up and then get a big swing with like something like Machako's Reign of Truth. Hopefully your creature has trample and does big damage, and then you get a creature out of it at the end. It's definitely like a deck that benefits in best of 1 KCB super aggressive when it comes to actually beating down on your opponent. It's still a good deck, and if you're someone who's like on the budget side, this is definitely a deck that you could easily build probably quicker than what I did, as I think this is one of the first decks I could craft outside of like mono red goblins for the whole. And yet again, like I said, this is another deck that doesn't have a lot of things that rotate out. Field of Ruin I don't think rotates out because I think that came in with the Innistrad Midnight Hunt. The Pathways rotate out, which is not a big deal because you could probably replace that with the dual land from Innistrad. Then you also lose like your Rune of Might, but it's a possibility that we could get another rune or aura that could give some target creature trample. But it's not the biggest problem there. Yet again, it's still a very good deck for being a very budget-friendly cost. I think for overall for me, it would cost me 4 commons, 17 uncommons, 11 rares, which would leave me 4 extra rares, and 0 mythics. So it's definitely a good deck if you don't want to play a lot of mythics. This is definitely that deck. Now, the next deck up on the list is actually probably the best deck of the format, just in terms of being as aggressive as possible, and that is Boros Aggro. And the reason why this deck is just so good is there's a lot of value in the 1, 2, and 3 drops to just make the early game very, very strong for this deck, just because you can play like a turn 1 Hopeful Initiate or Tomano faces the Kakusan Follow that up with either a Luminarch Aspirant, Bloodthirst Adversary, and then give either of this +1/+1 counter from the Kumano, or you also can swing in with this, the Adversary, and also the Hopeful Initiate, and then also gain make the Hopeful Initiate go up a power, so then it's a 2/3. And then follow that up after that. You can play things like Brutal Cathar, which is a spot removal spell, also a creature, which is definitely very good. And if you get the night and day cycle working, you then get a 3/3, essentially creature that's also like a removal spell. That also, if your opponent wants to remove it from the battlefield, they have to pay 3 life unless you use some sort of global ability. And then if it ever flips back over again after being on the night side, you get to take another thing off the battlefield creature-wise, and it's definitely very good. And there's no minimum like cost, so it can essentially hit their biggest creature, which is definitely pretty effective. Sunrise Cavalier is definitely another card that benefits from the night and day cycle, because every time it flips from day and night, it gets a +1/+1 counter on target creature control, which is definitely very good. And in itself is a 3-mana 3/3 trample haster, which is definitely pretty effective for that mana slot. And then to round it out, we have Thunder and Raiju. Because this deck puts a lot of +1/+1 counters on it, Thunder and Raiju will deal X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of modified creatures we control other than itself. So you can either put a counter on itself, or you can put it on another creature. And if you have a bunch of other creatures like a 1, 2, and 3 drop that all have +1/+1 counters on it, Thunder Raiju is going to easily do 3 damage to your opponent's face on top of whatever you're hitting for, which makes this deck just super impactful. Like, this is a deck that can like end the game on like turn 4 easily. I know I definitely did a video on this. It was definitely a deck that I think like in an hour I probably played like 11 or 12 games, and I think I won 10 of them. Definitely a deck that's definitely impactful. This is a deck, if I were to choose it, it'd probably be like a deck that is one good for ladder grinding as well. Just in that basis of that it's it's definitely a quick deck, so even if I don't win matches, I can just get right back into the fold and then just kind of keep on looping. So definitely a deck that I'm really high on. But before I like make my announcement, I am just going to kind of go over one more deck, and this is definitely another deck that I was considering. Though the one problem with this deck, this is just like the problem with goblins. There's a lot in this deck that rotates out, but this is definitely another deck that I feel like has kind of made a little bit of a resurgence, and that is mono white spells. And it's not really like it's essentially focused around spells, but it's essentially focused around playing a lot of cheap cards that allows you to play double spells to get additional triggers. You have things like Monk of the Open Hand that gets +1/+1 counters every time you play a second spell. You have things like Clarion Spear, which gives us 1/1 flyer creatures. Just trying to get the board as wide as possible, as quickly as possible, and just trying to cast as much as possible out on the battlefield and just kind of overwhelm your opponent with just sheer width of cards for the most part. And then you have things like the Maul of the Skyclays, which helps finish out what you're trying to do for the most part. That's definitely a good deck, but this is a deck that's probably the hardest hit out of all the decks I did. I didn't put mono red goblins here just because it's the same effect. We'll lose like probably half the deck just by rotation. Just if I just kind of click and drag all the cards that would rotate out with rotation in like these 2 piles, you essentially lose everything. So this is definitely not one of those decks you want to sink a bunch of currency into, though it is a viable deck. It's been like the second or third best deck currently in the meta. It's kind of like one of those things that kind of fluctuates just because sometimes mono white's a little more popular, sometimes this version of it's popular, and then Boros Aggro is kind of in that mix as well. But yet again, like I said, it's a very viable deck. I can actually craft it, which is definitely pretty cool. It is probably yet again another not super expensive deck just because I already own some of the cards. It only requires 12 commons, 14 uncommons, 6 rares, and 4 mythics, and that's definitely pretty cool too. That I would still have 8 or so rares afterwards, and then I think I would maybe have 1 mythic, but it would eat the most at my commons and uncommons, which definitely makes it pretty awesome. But like I said, I was kind of alluding to it when I just went over it. I do think for this challenge, and I do think if I want to do other things, maybe try to do a stretch goal where I create a second deck, I want to maybe try to do farm a bunch of currencies, maybe buy the mastery pass, and then kind of utilize that to make an additional deck. I am going to probably lean with Boros Aggro. I know it's probably like the most overplayed deck currently in the format. I know that I'm not bringing anything new to it, but I do think it's definitely one of those decks that's pretty straightforward, pretty easy. And just the idea of being able to finish matches as quickly as possible will kind of allow that grinding process to be kind of cut in half almost, and allowing me to kind of like, almost experiment a little bit more here and there. And like I said, I do think another stretch goal I want to do, since we're not even halfway through the challenge, is I kind of want to see if I can build 2 decks in by the end of the month, or see how close I could get to another deck. Yet again, this is just like the mono white deck. This deck doesn't actually require a ton. It only requires 4 uncommons. Really, the biggest impact is the rares. And the mythics are at 4. But the crazy part is, if I can get more rare wild cards by the end of the month, I could easily craft any of these other decks just because I already have, a lot of the cards for those decks. I could even craft mono white spells if I want to go for that. And this deck isn't super hard hit by rotation. We lose a little bit of spot removal with the Royal Eruption. We lose Luminarch. And that's really about it. Oh, we lose the pathways. in the creature land. But yet again, this is stuff that we can, you know, substitute with other dual lands of the format. We can play this, the Innistrad ones. You know, definitely a deck that's still definitely viable. And there's definitely some cards in here that I do think will be still pretty viable in, you know, rotation for the most part. So I think this is the deck I am going to craft. I am then going to jump into some games and then maybe kind of talk about what the future of, you know, this challenge is going to be, just because, you know, we've hit the point of me crafting the deck, and that was kind of like essentially the point of the challenge. And we kind of did it in less than 13 days because I haven't even played a game today. We won't be able to complete the daily quest, of course, just because it is a blue and black, you know, quest for 500 gold. But, you know, yet again, I do have a lot of plans to kind of, you know, get us to maybe that next goal of creating a second deck. Maybe playing some standard events, kind of see how we do there. Maybe get some play-in points, which then we could use to then enter in some tournaments down the road. The sky's the limit at the end of the day. Do some premier drafts, get currency that way, and like maybe try to, like I said, get that mastery pass, get the other tier of the mastery pass that is technically locked, and then get all these rewards as we unlock it, which definitely will help us out a lot as well. And there's just additional rewards. There's some gems there. Just because I do think that in a month time, playing every single day and just grinding out, you know, the mastery pass, you can definitely easily get to, like, you know, rank 30 within a month, if not more, just based on the, you know, the weekly reset and stuff like that. And all these additional rewards will allow us to get some cosmetics, and then we haven't even spent a dime playing the game, which will definitely help us out overall as a whole. With that being said, I am going to dive into my first game. I am going to just do it in rank play for my for this challenge. I will kind of pilot the deck. I will kind of talk through the first game. So let me dive into some games. I'll get the daily wins, and then we'll kind of talk about what's next on the challenge overall as a whole. All right, so turn one, we're on the play. This hand is amazing. This is an easy keep. I am going to play Kamano. Now the real question is, do I play Luminarch on turn one, or do I play Bloodthirsty Adversary? And that's like the real tricky part here. I think we play Luminarch just because it's going to come in the battlefield. It'll get a +1/+1 counter, and then it'll get additional +1/+1 counter, so it's already a 3/3. And then we can attack in with a Bloodthirsty Adversary our next turn. And they're already eyeing our Luminarch Aspirant, so maybe they're thinking about bouncing it, or they're like, holy crap, it's already a 3/3. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, so this is definitely a big turn for us, just because we can do stuff like this. And we just eat their creature. And for the point of this, you know, the point of this, we'll just go wide. You know, we'll distribute the +1/+1 counter. We have their creature. Nice. They have a treasure. And this will just kind of put the +1/+1 counter here. We'll swing in. If they block, they block. They still trade, and we still do 4. I'm going to say go, and then we flip. So now we have protection on our Brutal Cathar. So if they double spell here, we're in a position to take their next thing. And then we just swing back for 7 damage. That's fine. So they get an extra land. All right. They're at 3, and we play a Hopeful Initiate, and we say go. I don't want to double spell because I don't really have a reason to really flip the brute. So we'll leave it there, and then they're pretty much in a position that they have to play something or they're dead. Like they have to play multiple things. Sure. And that's game 1. So not that bad, pretty quick. I've only been recording for 2 minutes, and that's already the first game, so definitely an improvement, and we're slowly going up ranks. Opponent goes first, and this hand's not great. Just because we have no white mana, we have a single creature here, and sure, we have our single Valorous Stance. But overall, you know, nothing that really stands out that would be, you know, very viable for us to be aggressive that this deck wants to be. So we'll mulligan. Hand's a lot better. I think we ship the Valorous Stance just because I feel like it's the least useful card of, you know, what we drew. And of course, we're on the draw, so we definitely can draw back up. So shipping one's not that bad. And I guess our opponents decide on what color land they want to drop. It's definitely, you know, one of those things that takes a second to kind of figure out. All right, so definitely not bad. We'll keep up our removal. We drew a Luminarch, which is definitely good for, you know, turn 2. Just because we can pump itself, you know, get that going. They have two mana out, which is not bad. They're playing green-white, so maybe they're playing enchantments, which is not still a bad deck. And we have, you know, the spot removal. Okay, they're ramping a little bit. Sure. And we're just going to get rid of it just because, you know, every time they play a creature afterwards, they're going to gain some life. And it's not the most viable that way. And now we just really need that additional land. Just because that will allow us to possibly, you know, take whatever creature they have or play a Sunrise Cavalier, which would definitely be beneficial. Either of them start the day-night cycle, which is definitely cool. We have 2 Royal Eruptions, which are definitely beneficial. If they Brutal Cathar us, we can always, you know, Royal Eruption their Brutal Cathar. And then we get our Luminarch back. So they're playing life gain. Definitely an okay deck. But I do think the Cavalier's the play. And I could probably, you know, be super aggressive and just, you know, play like a Cathar, but I'll leave it back just and kind of see, you know, what they're doing here. And they have 1 minute open and we're at a pause, so I'm not really sure why we're paused here. I mean, maybe they have a response. I can't think of a 1 mana response, but it's possible. And they'll probably gain some life here, which will then pump the Unicorn, which is not the biggest of deals, just because if it gets pumped additional times, we'll just take it with Brutal Cathar. And it's possible that they're also playing the Lifeline deck, which is a possibility. So maybe they're looking to see what answers they have. I can't remember exactly what's in the Lifeline deck, but I definitely think the Unicorn's in there, and the Innkeeper's definitely another viable option. Sure. Sure. Now the question is, are they going to sit back or attack? I mean, it's definitely an interesting call, right? When you do things like that. We only have... I think we take the creature. Just because that will grow if they gain life, and then we just swing in. Now, if they don't do anything, we can go to the night, get a +1/+1 counter. Brutal Cathar becomes a 3/3 with Ward. The other thing that's good about taking things with +1/+1 counters on them is that it will get reset if it ever does enter the battlefield again, so it won't come back as what it is. That is definitely a bit of a problem, per se. I mean, I'll swing for 4. If they block, they block. And then I'll let it flip. And I'll put a +1/+1 counter here. So if they double spell, it's definitely not the biggest problem. And then we can always reactively get rid of whatever they play outside of the Righteous Valkyrie. Plus having the additional 4/4 with first strike is definitely good. Sure. And I don't think they can attack here. Alright, so we're still missing a land, which is not the greatest. I'll swing here and see what they do. Because we have first strike, we can easily eat one of these. Alright. And we'll say go. We'll play this and we'll say go. Puts them at 5. So they do have to gain a chunk of life, which could be a challenge. And the other benefit too is if they play 2 spells, we're gonna flip it to day. We're gonna take one of their creatures. Sure. Now if they play another spell, this would be great for us in this position. They're tapping for 2 green, which gets rid of a blocker. And if I have removal, that's not good for them. Are they doing anything with it is the question. Okay, so they went to combat. Interesting. And then we'll actually also flip it. And we'll swing in. And this puts them at a position that they have to maybe block because they're dead. Because that's 8 points of damage. And then we'll just eat their other creature. And I guess they're going to just let it game be game. Still not too bad. That's victory number 2 with the deck. Moving up the ranks pretty good. We're on the play. Hand's great. I do think it's probably like turn 1 Hopeful Initiate, turn 2 Aspirant. Though there is you could say that you could do turn 1 Kumano and then turn 2, turn 2 Aspirant that way. All right, so it looks maybe possibly like a mirror matchup, which isn't the worst. Looks like they got a dual land, so puts them at a slight disadvantage. We have reactive spells to remove whatever they may have in their way. If they have removal for us, they may play it here. Sure. Looks like we're playing a combo deck, so it's definitely going to be a challenge for us to get in for lethal, just because they're going to try to cheat out creatures by, hopefully we can kill them by turn 5. And I don't think they actually hit... Oh, they hit 1 creature. So we'll Kumano here, get that going. We'll play a second Luminarch. And we'll put them both on this Luminarch just because we can get the training going for the Hopeful Initiate, which then pumps that up higher. And then they're already back to 13 after they gain 2 life back. So we're definitely putting the pressure on them. The question is, can they get to where they need to get to? Sure. And that possibly just turns into a blocker. We don't have a creature. We'll ping there. We'll go to combat. Swing. And we'll deal our damage. And now they're at 3, and they're essentially dead unless they can... unless they could, gain some life. But we were going to remove their enchantment there, which then doesn't allow them to discard, which they probably want to get some card draw to maybe find something that gain them a little bit of life. So we move up a rank, which is definitely good. And it just shows you the sheer power of this deck. That was only turn 3, and our opponent was already behind so drastically that it's just they're playing from behind and they only can try to just to survive long enough. Around the play, hands yet again awesome. Don't have a turn 2 play, but it's really that debate. Do we Kumano turn 1 or do we Hopeful Initiate turn 1? And it's definitely a tough one just because we don't have anything on turn 2, but we could draw into it. I think a part of me wants to Kumano just because by turn 3 we can get our 2/2. And the worst case scenario, we just play Hopeful Initiate empty and then it'll get pumped up that way. Alright, so they're playing Goblins, which isn't a bad matchup, I don't think. I think we have the advantage here. Just because this will come in as a 3/3. And then whatever Goblin they may have here, we could easily just eat it with a Brutal Cathar. And then just get advantage that way. And we'll also get a 2/2 as well. Sure. I mean, it's fine if they use the removal. No? I think... Oh. They thought about it. Ooh. If only that was a turn earlier. Alright, so we get a 2/2. We'll play this on red, just because we need double red for a Raiju. And I think we hold the Brutal Cathar, just on the basis of in case they play a bigger goblin that's in our way that we can't get through. If they play another removal spell, that's fine, because that's really slowing them down. Interesting. So they got to play with fire they could play. But I feel like this is an interesting goblin deck, right? Because artifacts seem a little out of place in a goblin deck, unless they're playing like artifacts and goblins, or maybe they're playing equipments. Feels just a little clunky of what they're overall trying to do here. And now I guess they're torn between. Sure, I probably would have pointed that at my face. I wouldn't have pointed at my face. I'm not going to block. I mean, if you kill my Luminarch, that's fine. All right. And we'll play a Raiju. We'll put a counter here. We'll attack in. Pump the Raiju. And they're at 5. And there we go. They're at essentially 2 if they don't kill anything. Yeah. They're at essentially 2 just because if they don't kill anything and we swing, regardless of what they have in front of us, we still do 2 point. Well, they're at essentially 3 because we do 2 points of damage just because 2 other creatures with +1/+1 counters on them, and then if they don't play enough creatures, they won't be able to block and they're essentially dead. But definitely a weird deck that I'm not sure 100% what they're trying to do. It seems like they're playing some burn. They got Fireblade Charger, and then they also have Experimental Synthesizer, which is not a bad card. It just feels like it's not a card that fits well here, just because spending 3 mana just to get a 2/2 is not great. It definitely works good in Anvil because you can sacrifice it and don't actually have to pay the 3. You still get a 1/1 creature out of it, and then you also get the secondary card because it's whenever it leaves battlefield. So definitely, it's an okay card, but it's not a great card for like a mono red deck, I would say. Hand's not good because we have white cards but no white mana. It's not much better, but I guess it could work. So we'll get rid of that and hopefully draw our white mana in the process. I know that'd be a lot of lands or a lot of mana. Let's see what kind of deck they are. So blue-black. Zombies. Interesting. They really can't attack. They really can't block. I mean, they could. I'll take 3. I'm not really worried about that. We get an extra creature next turn, which is not bad. Sure. So, note there. Couldn't they have exploited on the end of their turn? I don't know. All right, so we're a little mana flooded right now in the wrong colors, which is not great. But I mean, we're still putting pressure. I could have played another adversary, but I feel like I want to hold it back just in case. Who knows? I mean, if we get a white mana, this would definitely be beneficial to us. Just because that opens up a lot of avenues, like playing Brutal Cathar, starting the day-night cycle. They're looking at our Kamano. Not sure why they're looking at that. It just, if things get dealt damage, they get exiled instead of going to the graveyard. So it's probably wondering why their creature went to the exile instead of the graveyard. Sure. And they're not attacking, even though they're 2/2 doesn't really do much on its own. Yeah, I mean, I keep on putting the pressure on them. I'm like mana screwed at the moment, and I'm missing a color. And they're gonna take it, interestingly. I mean, I'm like 1 mana away from changing this game around. And there's no way you can exploit in this situation just because... Oh my goodness. Are they really going to go down to 2? They're really gonna go down to 2. Sure. And I think they played... I believe they played their land for the turn. Sure, but that comes into play tapped. And they have to block. Or we just don't attack and we just hit them for 2 in the face. Definitely a weird game. I felt like that turn where they put themselves to 2 is probably not the greatest. Alright, I think it's a lot better than the last one where we didn't have any of this. In turn. Maybe they're playing the same deck. I don't know. Maybe they're playing the Reanimator deck. They're playing the Reanimator deck. They're not playing the Reanimator. They're doing something crazy here. Dragon's Approach. Interesting. Well, we're going to play our Brutal Cathar, even though it's not going to hit anything. Just because if they don't play anything, we can flip. Or if we don't flip it, if we don't play anything, we can flip. We just need to also draw a second red. That'd be pretty helpful here. I'm kind of intrigued just because I haven't seen a Dragon's Approach in a minute. And how many does it need? Sure. Okay. Game's easy. We'll put that there. It'll bring you to 10. Sure. Got a second one. Good game. Alright, so that's actually where I'm going to probably leave it for the gameplay. I'll probably just do what I normally do from here, just going forward until I get my max amount of wins. But I figure I'd give you guys a little bit of talking over the games. For the most part, you know, the deck is doing what it's supposed to do. It's just beating down your opponent's face as quickly as possible. It's helping us grind out our daily wins as quickly as possible, which I do think is kind of what you want for your first deck. A deck that's going to help you kind of finish your goals you want for the day, and then it kind of help go build towards our second deck, which could be, you know, a little bit of variety, maybe something a little bit of a different tempo, maybe go to a tempo deck or go to maybe something a little bit more control. But let me just finish up my games. We'll dive back in. We'll kind of go over where I finished out when it comes to the ranked ladder, just because that's where I'm going to grind my games currently. You know, just because I feel like that's the more fair way to play instead of just going to the play queue and then just playing against whatever. I do think, you know, getting some ranked wins in the process is definitely beneficial. So just stay tuned, and I'll be right back after I finish out my games. So we are done with my 15 games of playing ranked MTG Arena. I did end up having to play 22 games overall to get my 15 wins, which is still not a bad win rate. At least, we're at a 68% win rate. You can see our ladder slowly climbing up. We're working our way through silver right now. Overall, having a 68% win rate in the lower tiers is definitely pretty good. We'll speed our way hopefully through this tier to break in through gold and then maybe eventually into diamond and then platinum and then possibly even mythic in a pretty decent pace at this rate. The deck has been fun. There are some interesting things. A couple of the games I did lose because I did get mana screwed. Were a couple of games that, our opponents did have a little bit of that extra life gain. I just couldn't push that, enough damage before they gained enough life outside of what I could actually do. But still, nonetheless, having a deck that can get 15 wins or play 22 matches in about an hour and a half is definitely a lot better than what I was doing before. This is dramatically cut down, the amount of time I've been playing in MTG Arena. And this is definitely going to set up our account to hopefully progress and get additional rewards on top of just creating our initial deck. There's a possibility that we can possibly even craft another deck. By the end of the 30 days, which would definitely be pretty cool. It definitely shows what's really possible. Though we have gotten kind of lucky through the process, we're right now sitting at a nice gold 1 in limited. We're sitting at a silver tier 3, just because even though I lost 7 games, I don't lose rank until I hit gold. So we did get through all the way up until silver tier 3. So if you win 15 games, you'll be here as well, which is definitely pretty awesome. And then probably tomorrow, after I complete my 15 daily wins, as long as I don't lose also 15, I'll probably be gold by that point. Outside of that, the next big challenge I want to do is actually save enough gems to actually unlock the Mastery Pass. And what the benefit of the Mastery Pass is, even though this is alchemy themed, is that we'll get all these additional packs down here at the bottom of other sets, even of Baldur's Gate, which is not the best, but we'll definitely get some additional packs, which will help us boost our collection of what cards we have in our library. There's some currency here on the bottom tier. There's some additional gems. There's 1,000 gold. As we scroll through, you'll see there's just, a bunch of other currency. Sure, we'll get some cosmetics, but yet again, being a free-to-play player, cosmetics aren't the greatest, but being able to get all these gems, all this gold is definitely something beneficial to a free-to-play player. And I want to show it's possible in a way that you could buy this without actually having to spend money for the Mastery Pass. I'm not sure if I'll be able to get there by the end of the 30 days, but I do think I have a decent way that I'll do this by, just because I don't really want to draft Baldur's Gate. And I know the quick drafts are okay, but the return that you get for your entry is not really worth it in that sense. And I think I'm going to try the standard events. It's definitely something that they've updated and kind of changed. I know I'm kind of blocking it. It does cost 375 gems, so if I really wanted to, I could take my deck and play it. Or it costs 2,500 gold, which is roughly about 2.5 days worth of farming gold, which isn't that bad. So if I can farm at least one of these, and then do pretty well, like getting 4 or 5 wins, I do think we can get there in a matter of maybe about a week or two, give or take. So if we get 300 to 400 gold, you times that by, I do like 2 or 3 of these a week. So that's an extra 1,200 gold, 1,200 gold. You're looking at possibly, enough to probably get there. If I want to maybe gamble as I get closer to the end, I could try to spend real money if we're doing really well. Or not spend real money, spend our gems to then hopefully try to get to the 6 wins, the 7 wins, the point where we'll get more gems than we are spending to actually get in the event. So this is definitely another avenue I'm definitely going to take. I definitely want to see how the deck performs, just because I know I'm playing one iteration of Boros Aggro and there's other iterations. Is Boros Aggro good enough to play in a more limited event? Just because this matchmaking is a little bit different. It's all based on win rate. It's not based on deck strength and all that stuff. So if you do very well and haven't really lost much, you'll play against the better players of the standard events. But this is definitely something I want to test out. Maybe we'll get some play-in points at the end. We'll get some additional packs. We'll get some gems at least. And this is definitely going to be the way just to farm that additional currency, just because it'll take us a lot shorter to get the gold than it will take to get the gold for this, and it will take to get the gold for something like a premier event. And hopefully by the end of this, we'll have the Mastery Pass. We'll be decently high level on the Mastery Pass, as well as maybe have enough currency to build that second deck. So that's kind of where I'm leaning right now in Arena. I'll be playing all my games probably on the ranked ladder, just because that's the best way to play. So if I'm playing the deck, with it being a higher tier meta deck, at least might as well be grinding some of that ranked ladder. Hopefully we'll get, hopefully close to Mythic as possible, if not Mythic by the end of this challenge. I do think it's possible if we're playing 15 games, if we're playing at least for 15 wins a day, that we'll get there at some point, as long as we keep that healthy win rate overall. But that being said, guys, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. below. What deck would you have built out of the deck list that I showed you in today's video? Would you have went with the same choice because this is one of the better performing decks overall, or would you went for something that would have been more in your style of decks? If it was something like a little bit of a tempo deck, or even something a little bit more of that other style of aggro that's a little bit more all-in one-on-one creature type thing. But let me know in the comments below. If you like the video, hit that like button. Definitely helps out a lot. If you're new here, you want to post new videos on the channel, hit that subscribe button. Until next time, I'll catch you in the next video. Just want to give a special shout out to the channel members here on my YouTube channel. You can also become a channel member yourself down below the video, hitting that join button. It definitely helps out a lot, and I just appreciate you guys for your support.